what's up YouTube? Whereas most of my videos I've been doing a lot of stuff on like simple repairs or basically preparing your car for further modifications down the road like boost or nitrous. Lots of focus on the mechanical aspects of things and working on the fit on the car itself. Today I want to focus more on the software end of things and like the tuning aspect of tuning up your car, because tuning is extremely important, whether you have a naturally aspirated car or a modified car. And as you know, all the cars that come from the factory are basically the same, one size fits all. But they don't know who's going to use the car and under what circumstances they're going to use it. And as the car wears in and you continue driving it in different climates and stuff and such, it will fall out of calibration. And also the tune is generally set pretty conservatively from the factory, so there's always a lot of extra potential that's yet to be tapped. And a lot of people who buy their cars, they're not necessarily interested in dumping huge amounts of money into aftermarket modifications. They just want to get a few extra horses out of some very light modifications like a colder intake kit, or in this case, like I say, you can get some extra horsepower just from tuning alone and not making any changes to the car itself. The gains are not going to be huge, but they're going to be noticeable. For example, my car is a 5th gen Camaro. It's a 2013, and it puts out 426 horse from the factory. With the exhaust option, you get a few extra on top of that, so maybe 430. And it's not uncommon to get an extra 20 horsepower on top of that just from a good tune. So that's why it's really important to tune your car. It's a really good investment, and it's like a long-term investment too, because you'll continue to use the tuning software over and over again, not only to keep your tune good, throughout the years, but also if you want to make any changes to the car, you're going to need to tune it again anyway. So it's the gift that keeps on giving, and I highly recommend getting a tuner and downloading the software and using it for keeping your car's performance at its maximum. So, like I said, the focus of this video is going to be more for your typical casual automotive enthusiast who's just bought his car and just wants to, get into tuning, light modifications, and generally keep with the whole naturally aspirated setup. And I will mention, tuning features and settings that affect, more severe modifications like boost or nitrous, but we're not going to go into too much detail about it. I'm just going to focus solely on what's like obvious, with immediate benefits that you can do right here, right now, really quick and simple stuff that will give you the maximum bang for your buck without having to change anything on your car. So we'll start off with the OS section here. These are all separated by categories. So when you start getting into HP tuners, you'll notice that there's all these categories at the top, and then there's further subcategories below that. So I'm going to get into that and explain how they all work and which ones are important for you for your naturally aspirated car. So under the OS tab, generally there's nothing here that you'd be interested in, but for some computers, they will support changing the OS from a mass airflow sensor type fuel metering system to a volumetric efficiency table, and that's here where it says speed density air mode. So speed density, or SD, refers to the use of a volumetric efficiency table instead of a mass airflow table. Why you would want to do that? There's a couple of reasons that are really important. First of all, a mass airflow sensor uses a hot wire to measure airflow, whereas volumetric efficiency table uses a combination of 3 different sensors: the RPM, the intake air temperature, and the manifold pressure sensors. What that does is it gives you higher fidelity, finer control over your air fuel metering, because it's relying on 3 different sensors to give you a very fine-tuned level of detail over exactly what your air mass is. Air mass is not something that you can easily interpolate from just a hot wire, although that's what the purpose of a MAF sensor is, and that's what it tries to achieve, and it does so fairly well for the most part for the drivability of a daily driver vehicle. For people who don't care about performance, It's good for emissions controls and stuff like that, but if you really want to get serious about performance, a VE table will always win out on a MAF sensor. And the table is also way bigger. It's got probably more than 10 times the data points, so you're just going to get so much more accuracy and precision out of that table, and therefore your air-fuel ratio is going to be that much more controlled and refined at every single load point, and that's why you want to have this. So go to this tab here. It'll say not applied. Just go to applied. What that'll do is it'll rewrite the entire OS. At that point, you'll have to resave the file and upload it to your car. This will cost you a couple of credits from HP tuners because they charge for this modification. But if your ECM supports it, it's almost a must. You just really have to do this because it's just got huge benefits, involved in that. So change that up, and then we're done with that tab. Go to the engine tab. Start with general. Nothing too important here except for TAC output where it says type. Before I think it said serial. You want to change that to crank only if you need a TAC signal for an auxiliary TAC or for some sort of a custom standalone control system or anything that requires a TAC input. So what you're going to do, change that to crank. Put 29 and 29 in here because the flywheel on a 5th gen Camaro is a 58X flywheel. It's got 58 teeth on it, so this is half and half of that. And what that'll do is you'll get, for every half a rotation of the flywheel, you'll get a high and then a low square wave with equal pulse width, and that pulse width will be used to trigger whatever auxiliary TAC you plug in and give the correct RPM. Some of the TACs require 2 pulses per revolution, so in that case you would want to switch this to like 14 and 15. But in my particular case, 29 is fine. Just look at your hardware and see what it needs. And then the other thing too is that you're going to have to disconnect the wiring harness from your ECM physically under the hood and tap into a unused pin in there where this square wave signal is going to be generated. All of that you can look up on Google. It's too much out of the scope of what we're doing here for me to get into more detail, but that's what this does. So if you need a TAC signal, you want to change it to crank here and put whatever numbers here you need to put, either 29 and 29 or 14 and 15. Next we go to idle. You can change the idle speed if you want to. I wouldn't lower it too much. It gives a nice lope and a nice sound to lower it, but you could have voltage issues because your alternator won't be spinning fast enough. So I would keep it pretty much stock unless you're having issues. One thing I should note is that when you change the OS to VE mode, it's going to change the quality of your idle. You may have some bouncing of your RPMs where it sort of like fluctuates plus or minus a couple hundred RPM back and forth. Wherever your target is, it's going to sort of bounce back and forth over that number. I've never been able to completely eliminate it, but you can sort of mitigate it if you go to proportional airflow. This top axis here represents how many RPM above or below your target RPM is the current RPM. So imagine you set it to 600. 600, if you're actually getting 600, it's going to be 0 error. If you're getting 632, you're going to be 32 over. If you get 664, you're going to be 64 over. So on and so forth on the positive and on the negative side here. So what these numbers here in the fields represent is how much additional air or how much less air to command in order to compensate for that error and bring the RPM back to 0 again. So what you can do is you can fudge these numbers a little bit to compensate for the error that you're getting, the bounce that you're getting. You can play with the numbers and find out what works for you. Generally speaking, if you lower the numbers, you're going to get a more subtle correction, and that will tend to cause the bouncing to go away after a while, but you're going to have to play with it. This is only if you really care. It's not going to hurt the engine. It's just a bit annoying to listen to that when you're idling at a stoplight or something like that. Some people like it, some people don't. I kind of wanted to get rid of it, so this is how you do that. Other than that, I really wouldn't focus too much on the entire idle tab. It's just fine the way it is. Not too much going on here. Going to the airflow tab, here's your primary air metering tabs where all of your air metering goes on. Your air fuel ratio, that is. So basically your car measures the amount of air mass going into it, and it tries to determine how much fuel to add. The stock scheme of doing that is using the mass airflow sensor, and here you see mass airflow calibration, airflow versus frequency. You open this table up, you can see it's a one-dimensional table. It's only got one row to it, and the hot wire mass airflow sensor will report back a frequency that's based on the amount of air flowing past it, and the computer will look that value up. Let's say it's 2550, and it finds 12.88, and that corresponds to how much fuel should be added to that amount of air. So what you'll want to do is road scan your vehicle and log the MAF sensor, and whatever air fuel ratio you happen to be getting at that point, what you'll do is you'll log the long-term fuel trim values, and that will tell you sort of what the deviation or the error is in your fueling, and you'll use those numbers as a percentage, so to speak. So if you're getting an LTFT value of 3, for example, that kind of represents a positive 3% deviation from what you want. So you'll go to the appropriate cell, 1800 for example, add 3% to that, and this number will be 3% bigger than 6.33, and that will basically tune your MAF table so that the next time you go driving, you're getting a more accurate fueling model than what you just had. It's the same with most of the tables that way. You basically find the error and you apply a correction factor to it. That's if you're using your MAF sensor. If you decided not to change the OS to a speed density tune, you would use this table. If you change it to a VE tune, you no longer need to use this table. This is sort of obsolete after that. What you would do is you'd be changing these two tables, normal, IMRC closed, and open. If you open the first one here, you'll see how much bigger the table is than the MAF table we just looked at, and it's a two-dimensional table. If you look at it in surface mode, you can sort of see what it looks like here. This is why you want to have this model versus the MAF tuning model, because this gives you so many more data points that depend on so many more parameters than a simple hot wire mass airflow sensor. And that allows you to very, very finely control how much fuel you're getting at any load point, which is really important because a MAF table will sort of fudge all that together. You could have 6,000 RPMs and 50 kilopascals or something like that, or you can have 5,000 RPMs and 60 kilopascals, and as far as the MAF sensor is concerned, it's the same data point. So here you get a whole bunch of surface, or you get a big surface here with all these different lines, and that allows you to get way more precision than the simple linear MAF table can give you. So again, to get to this state, where you're tuning this, you want to go for a drive and log the LTFT values based on RPM and manifold pressure. So it'll be a function of those two parameters, and you'll get an LTFT value for each of these individual points. That LTFT value will then translate into a correction percentage that you will apply to the table. So if you're getting a 3% deviation here, you're going to increase this value by 3%, just like the MAF table, except it's a little bit more time consuming because it's two-dimensional. Always try to err on the lower side. If your correction needs to be 3%, sometimes I cut that in half and just add 1.5, because you don't want to overshoot. It's always better to undershoot and then just do multiple tunes to get that right. So this will really improve the drivability of your car. It'll improve the the smoothness of how the car feels when you're driving it, and it'll prevent things like knock, because knock can arise when you have rapid fluctuations in your air-fuel ratio, and you don't want that. So tuning your air tables is really important, both for NA and for boosted applications. That's pretty much all you need to know about this entire airflow tab. This car in particular doesn't have a variable camshaft. If it did, you'd be wanting to change the phase of the intake and exhaust lobes, but in this case it doesn't have that, so no need to concern yourself with it. Pretty much we're done here, so we can move on to the fuel section now. Under fuel, let's see here. These settings all relate to your fuel injectors. If you have modified or changed your fuel injectors, as I have, you're going to need to look up the values from the manufacturer of the new injectors, and you're going to need to change some of the tables here. I've already done that, but if you have an NA car with the stock injectors, you're not going to need to touch this. The only thing that you may want to do is where it says here enrich desoot mode, you want to disable that. It should be enabled by default, but you want to disable it. What this is it's a feature that will lean out your car in the middle of a power enrichment event, and by leaning it out, the intent is to burn off some of the soot that has accumulated in your cylinder, like on your plugs, for example, because a lean burn tends to be hotter and it will sort of cook or vaporize some of that deposit, kind of like a self-cleaning oven, same principle. The problem with it, I mean, it's good in that sense, but the problem with it is that it happens at the worst possible time, which is during a wide open throttle event. You do not want to have your car go lean on you in the middle of a wide open throttle event. And I've seen people take scans of their car where they get a spike in their AFR values for no good reason at all, and they're like, what is this? You know, and it causes a bunch of knock, and it's just not good for your car. Especially if you're running high pressures, you know, from a supercharger. The last thing you want is to have a lean spike. You want to be able to control your air-fuel ratio and keep it nice and rich. So disable this, it's no good for your car. Going to cut off DFCO. This is not really going to improve performance, but it can be fun. DFCO is deceleration fuel cutoff. What it does is when you let off the gas and you're just sort of decelerating, the timing will shift. The timing will retard more accurately, and the fuel injectors will stop. They'll basically turn off until you hit the gas again. What this does is it leaves a bunch of unburnt fuel in the cylinders, and the engine will proceed to burn all of that off in the next few revolutions. And because the timing is so retarded, it's lighting off that mixture very late in the power stroke, so the combustion will basically still be going on when the exhaust valve opens, and it'll fire all that combustion like right out the exhaust, and what you'll get is like a bunch of pops and crackles coming out the back of your tailpipe if you have a relatively unrestricted exhaust system. And it sounds really awesome at low speeds, like when you're just sort of cruising through a residential street or something. You get a really nice sound from that. It's just a fun thing to have. There's probably a legitimate reason for this feature being here, that has nothing to do with performance or sound or whatever, but I just like the sound of it, so I turn it on. And you can do that easily by just changing the enable and disable coolant temperatures, RPM ranges, vehicle speeds, all this stuff all sort of just sets high and low limits on when to turn it on and when when to turn it on and when to turn it off. So you can easily do that. I wouldn't touch anything else here. On this RPM limit side here, you've got cutoff RPM versus gear. So what this is, it tells you, what is the maximum RPM that your computer will allow the vehicle to reach in any given gear. If your car happens to be, if you have like a really good flowing intake system, like good heads, an unrestricted high flow, cold air intake, etc., good exhaust, your car may be producing horsepower well up to the edge of its power band, and you may find that it's limited before you reach maximum horsepower. So in that case, you might want to raise these values to a higher one, like add a couple hundred RPM. But in the case of the Camaro, it reaches peak torque and peak horsepower well before 6600. So 6600 is just the limit of the valve train. I mean, because of the hollow stem valves, it can reach, you know, a little bit higher speeds than a push rod engine would normally be capable of. So I increased it to 6600, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's shifting at that point. That's later on. You can change all the shift points, but for now, I just, you know, I don't think you certainly wouldn't want it to go above 6600, but you can put it at 6600 just so that it's not limiting any of the other tables down the road. And that's pretty much all you need to know about this tab. Open and closed loop. Nothing really here that you need to know about too much. Although I would say that, you know, in the first couple sections here, open loop and open loop gains, there's a lot of tables here that will modify the power enrichment value that you get in this tab. And what you need to know here is that if you set your power enrichment tables to, like, let's say 12.7 to 1, you may notice that you're getting lower values than that. If you have a wideband O2 sensor hooked up to your car and you're like, why am I getting, you know, severely low air-fuel ratios? It could be because this power enrichment value is being overridden by one of these tables here, because these tables sort of augment or sometimes override the power enrichment table. If you find that happening, you can either zero out or, you know, severely reduce these tables to basically nothing, because you may not want that to happen, right? I think I've pretty much done that, actually. Yeah, I've already done that. I've already gone through all the tables and just nulled them out. You may not want to do that, but, you know, if you find that your power enrichment values are all screwy, you may need to do that. The other thing too, I should also mention, I forgot to mention it earlier, the volumetric efficiency table back here in the in the airflow section here. You know, at the top end up here in the bottom right hand corner, this is all stuff at like high pressures and high RPM values. Basically, wide open throttle conditions are all in this corner here. When your car goes into power enrichment mode, it's going to stop using closed loop system, i.e. your O2 sensors, and it's going to read these values directly and give you exactly that amount of fuel with no correction whatsoever from your closed loop system. So if your PE values are off, it's probably not the PE table that's the problem. It's probably here in this, you know, corner of your table that your values are just wrong. So what you need to do is you need to do a road scan and compare your wideband O2 sensor. So what you have to do first of all is buy a wideband O2 sensor and log that that device directly, you know, using your scan tool, and get the air-fuel ratio, and then compare that to the commanded air-fuel ratio that this VE table is commanding, and try to get those two values to be the same. Once you've synchronized that and you know that you're getting good actual values from the commanded values, then you can go to your PE table and tune that. You don't want to tune the PE table before you've sorted out your VE table. Your VE table should be essentially perfect before you get onto power enrichment. So for me to explain that, let's go to the power enrichment tab. Yeah, the only table that's of any importance here, well, actually, let's go to this one here, PE throttle. What this is, it tells you at what throttle position does your PE mode engage. So at what throttle percentage do you stop using closed loop mode and you go into open loop or power enrichment mode? Typically, the factory sets this to a very high value, sometimes 90%. It's not good, in my opinion, because if you log your vehicle, you will notice that your manifold pressures hit 9,500 kilopascals, which is 1 atmosphere, you know, no vacuum at all, well before 100% throttle. Usually 40-50% throttle, you're already, you know, maxed out on your pressure. So that's really where you need fuel enrichment. You don't want to wait until 100% to get that fuel enrichment. So I lower mine to 60. Based on experience, I find that works well for me. But, you know, look at your own manifold pressure values when you do a road scan, and try to pick a number that makes sense based on those results, and put it right across the board here. Going on to the EQ ratio, which is your power enrichment values. This basically says, okay, how much additional fuel do you want, at each RPM value when you're under wide open throttle conditions. This is a very important table for adding power to your car. A little bit of theory. Your air-fuel ratio, most people will sort of naively say, yeah, it should always be 14.7 because that's the stoichiometric ratio for gasoline. Well, yes and no. First of all, gasoline, depending on the type of gas, like a lot of gas is blended with ethanol. Ethanol will lower your air-fuel ratio, so it won't be 14.7 anymore. It'll be lower than that. But besides that, 14.7 is really only good for steady state cruising and low throttle conditions. You don't want that under high load. For high load, you're getting a lot of combustion events happening in a very short time because the RPMs are high, and the droplets of gasoline do not have time to vaporize fully. So a lot of that liquid gas does not get burned, it gets shot out the tailpipe. So to compensate, you need to add additional gas so that the vaporization of those gas droplets brings you back to what is essentially stoichiometric combustion. That's why it appears that you're running rich, but really you're just running stoic again, because you're under such a high load that you don't have time to burn all the gas. So maximum power is typically achieved at an air-fuel ratio of 12.7 to 1. And then based on a lot of flame tests that I've seen, 12.2 to 1 is like the maximum flame speed AFR value. So these values here are not in terms of AFR, they're in terms of lambda. And what lambda is you take your stoichiometric value for gas, 14.67, and you divide it by the air-fuel ratio that you want. So for example, if you were to pick 12.7 as your desired air-fuel ratio, you would do 14.67 divided by 12.7, and that actually gives you 1.155, which is what I have here. The reason all the values are identical across the board is because when you're doing your VE table tuning, what you want to do is you only want one parameter to be changing at any given time, because it makes tuning so much easier when you don't have to calibrate two things that are fighting each other. So basically set everything to one value that is fixed, like in this case 12.7 to 1. Then you go back to your VE table and you sort out all the discrepancies between your commanded AFR and your actual AFR. Once you've gotten all that straightened out, you're not trying to hit a moving target basically. Then at that point you can go back here and you can modify this table to get whatever AFR value you actually want, and you can be fairly certain that you're going to get that value because you've already tuned your VE table. So here's the strategy that I use, and I think it's a pretty decent strategy. Others will use their own logic on this, but as a general rule of thumb, the higher the engine speed, the faster the flame should be, because the flame has less time to catch up with the cylinder. The flame has less time to catch up with the piston as it descends from top dead center during the power stroke. And you want that flame to hit that piston, about 12 to 15 degrees after top dead center to get maximum power. So if you're up at 7,000 RPM, it's moving so fast that the flame can't catch up. So you want to have maximum engine speed, maximum flame speed for maximum engine speed, and also you want to advance the timing as well, but that'll come later. So right now, my advice to you would be to put 12.2 to 1, which is actually 1.2 in terms of lambda. Put that pretty much where your shift points would be. So if your car shifts at 6,500 RPM, you'd put 1.2 in there, and then I would go to where your car makes peak torque and pick a couple cells around that point. So in my case, I think it's peak torque is around 4,800, I think. So I would pick maybe these three cells here and make them all 1.155, which they already are actually. That's going to give you your 12.7 to 1, your maximum power, so that's where it should be. And then you can blend the values in between here using linear interpolation like this. So, and then from here all the way back to 0. So for 0, the lowest enrichment value I would use is 1.03. Again, that's my rule. That you can come up with your own rule if you want to. And then I would blend the values in between. So it sort of continues to get richer and richer and richer, and then it holds at 12.7 to 1, in the sweet spot right here. And then it gets richer and richer and richer so that the flame speed can increase further and catch up with that fast-moving piston head. And then, just fill these in here, 1.2, because those won't get accessed because the car will shift before it gets that high. And this is the strategy I use for my PE table. Basically, having the correct flame speed and the correct amount of gas in the cylinder will have a huge impact on your power. Another thing you're going to want to change is this enrichment ramp in value. It starts out as like 0.15 or something. Basically what this does is it controls how fast the additional fuel is added above and beyond your stoic value when you mash the pedal. So when you mash the pedal, the computer sort of blends the air-fuel calculation into PE mode gradually, and this controls the speed at which that happens. So you want it to be 2 because 2 is the highest number in that cell that you can put, and that's going to make the speed at which the PE values are realized at a maximum. It's going to give you that PE enrichment as fast as possible. The rest of the stuff, not really too important. PE delay, always make that 0. You don't want to delay your PE enrichment for any reason. COT, lean cruise, nothing really exciting going on here. If you have an automatic, an automatic transmission Camaro with a V8, it'll have displacement on demand. I don't like that stuff. That's why I have the manual, because the LS3 doesn't have any of that. So I'm not going to talk about it because I don't know anything about it anyway. Transient. This is a really complex model that has to do with how much fuel gets hits the port walls and evaporates, and how much evaporated gas gets into your cylinders, and so on and so forth. It's a lot of really advanced stuff that I would not touch. So moving on to the spark tables now. The only stuff you really need to worry about here are your high octane and low octane tables. If you open up the high octane table, this is the table that the computer primarily uses when you have good gas in the tank. If you have the correct octane level for the engine that you have, in the case of the Camaro, it'll run on 87. According to the manual, I would not put 87 in this car, because even though it'll run on it, it's a 10.7 to 1 compression ratio, and in my opinion, you shouldn't be running anything less than mid-grade gas. I would just recommend you use 91 all the time, or better, because that just allows you to get the maximum timing, and timing is really where you get free power. This table is going to be conservative from the factory so that you don't have any kind of engine damage issues or anything. They can get the maximum warranty out of their cars by trimming this back to give you a bit of a safety factor. So what you can do is you can claw some of that back just by increasing the spark values, half a degree or maybe 1 degree at a time, reflashing it to the car, scanning the car, seeing if you get any knock. If you get knock, you back it down again, and you keep backing it down until you have no knock. For a brand new car, it should not be knocking when you buy it, so you should be able to increase these values half a degree at a time until you find out where that point is where it just wants to knock, and then back it off by a degree or so. Because you don't want to be right on the brink of knocking, but you want to be pretty close to it. Like give yourself a healthy margin, but you want to try to get as much timing as you can out of this table. So it's really just a matter of looking at your scan and just adding timing. This is really not too much to it. You don't have to add timing down here. At the top, for example, or on the left-hand side. These are all parts of the table that almost never get used. You're never going to be at boost pressures at 400 RPM, for example, and you're never going to be at 6,000 RPM and vacuum unless it's part of your deceleration. So, you know, typically the stuff you're going to modify is going to be this corner of the screen here, and this is going to be where you're going to want to try to, you know, increase the timing a little bit. Once you do that, go to your low octane table and basically copy the entire high octane table over to the low octane table, and then select the entire thing and subtract 2 degrees. That's what I do. So your low octane table should be identical to your high octane table minus 2 degrees. It doesn't have to be, but that for me is a good number. What that does is if you ever put bad gas in the car and the octane's too low, it'll go back to the low octane table and prevent your car from detonating, which is always a good thing. The retard table basically dictates how much timing is pulled as a result of the knock sensor detecting knock. I would not touch this table. It's pretty good as it is. Works just fine. Some people, they want it to, you know, reduce the knock retard faster after it knocks, but I don't think there's much to gain in doing that. You'd probably just be adding more risk to your engine. Dwell, knock sensors, nothing to see here. Torque management is another big table in terms of gaining performance, because you can increase the threshold of how much torque the transmission and drivetrain and engine can handle before they start reducing power by limiting your spark or your fuel. So let's see. You can go through your gears here, gears 1 to 6, and it looks, in my case, it looks like they're already maxed out. I'm trying to find a table that isn't maxed out. I don't recommend maxing the tables out, by the way. If I've done it, don't follow what I do what I say. The strategy should be to add, pick a value, pick a margin that you're comfortable with, and add it consistently to all of the maximum torque values. Typically speaking, you know, design tolerances on a piece of equipment, whatever it is, transmission, whatever, they usually put a pretty healthy margin so that, you know, if something's rated for 400 foot-pounds of torque, it's not going to break at 410 foot-pounds. It's going to have, you know, pretty decent margins. So I like to pick a number that's conservative, like 15%, and I'll just increase the torque thresholds on everything by 15%. Or, you know, as you saw, maybe I'll just max the whole thing out so that there's no torque management at all. But I wouldn't do that. Keep the torque management. It's there for a reason. It's good to save your drivetrain in case you're abusive on your car. I baby my car, but some people are really abusive and they just mash the pedal all the time. And you don't want to snap your prop shaft or your output spline or anything like that. You don't want to break parts of your car because you took all that safety away. But RPM versus gear, max torque for each gear, brake torque limit, all of these values here. Let me see what else. Yeah, those ones there you can add your tolerance to. Generally speaking, I don't like using fuel cut as a means of controlling torque, because what that does is it turns off the injectors when you're under load in order to prevent you from adding more load. And I don't like using fuel cut because that'll create a lean condition. But I still have it enabled for some reason. I may disable that. Here I've disabled it. You can see traction control system. I don't like using fuel cut to control traction. I'd rather use the electronic throttle control, which is the fly-by-wire throttle plate, or adjusting spark. Both of those will do a perfectly fine job of cutting power. Power hop, always keep that on. That's there to save your axles from snapping. Your rear axles are kind of weak and the differential's kind of weak, and you don't want power. You don't want axle hop, which is what happens is you mash the gas and the rear tires will lose traction, and then they'll gain traction back, and then they'll lose it, and it sets up a harmonic where the tires will hop up and down, and that vibration and harmonic can destroy your axles. And this power hop algorithm basically detects that harmonic and tries to interrupt it by throttling the power. So keep that on. It's really good. Under engine, Some people screw around with the maps that basically dictate the commanded torque, but it can cause uh, like mill lights to illuminate on your dash, like check engine lights. It'll cause your car to go into limp mode. It's very finicky, and you can easily cause a problem. So I wouldn't touch it, to be honest. Supercharger is not relevant because you don't have one equipped stock, unless you have like a ZL1 or something. So that's pretty much it for engine. Under engine diagnostics, here's all your warning lights and everything. Airflow. This P0068 error is kind of a common error. Sometimes people like to disable this check if they're adding power, like significant boost, for example, because I think this relates to the maximum airflow value that the computer will register. So sometimes in boosted applications you may need to change the enable RPM value so that this doesn't get checked. What else? Everything else is pretty much, yeah, there's nothing really to show in the diagnostic section. Go to transmission. If you have an automatic transmission, there's going to be another tab here that's going to have all your shift pressures, your shift times, and your shift RPMs and all that stuff. For automatic transmissions, you can gain a huge amount of ET, like if you're going to the drag strip and doing the quarter mile. A huge amount of speed can be gained by altering your shift parameters, increase your shift pressure, decrease your shift time, and change your shift points so that you're sort of exploiting the meaty part of your power curve. And for that, you're going to need to go to the dyno and really know what your power curve is. So I wouldn't recommend changing your shift points until you've dynoed your car, but at least you can change the pressure and the times so that you have quicker shifts and harder shifts, which will actually, to an extent, it'll actually increase the longevity of your transmission, because softer shifts actually wear more on the friction material. But in this case, I have a manual transmission vehicle. It's a 6-speed Tremec 6060, and it does not have a tab for transmission settings, obviously, because that's all manually controlled. However, under manual, you'll notice something called CAGs. This is the bane of my existence, and I'm sure other people with manual transmission cars will agree. This is something that GM developed as a means of circumventing the gas guzzling tax. Basically, when a car has really bad mileage, the government slaps a penalty on the price of the vehicle that the customer has to pay for. So GM decided that they could get the gas mileage to be a little bit higher, and just high enough to avoid having to pay that, or to avoid their customers having to pay that gas guzzling surcharge. They were able to get them the mileage just above that threshold by employing this CAGs routine. What this does is you're driving along in first gear, and if your vehicle satisfies this list of conditions in terms of vehicle speed and barometric pressure and coolant temperature and all that, if it falls within this set of parameters, what it'll do is you go and try to shift from first into second gear, and it won't let you. It blocks out second and third gear, and a stupid warning light comes up on your dash and starts dinging at you, and it says shift into fourth. So you have to go from first to fourth, but by the time you figure that out, because you've attempted to shift unsuccessfully into second, you're sitting there screwing around with your shifter, looking at the lights and everything on your dashboard, and your RPMs have already dropped so low that by the time you put it into fourth, you're bogging the engine, and basically you could stall it, you could cause it to bog, and your passengers getting thrown forward in their seat. Really embarrassing if you have somebody else in the car. If not, personally annoying and just abusive on the transmission for no good reason except to satisfy some emissions or whatever, some fuel economy requirement. So basically everybody in the world wants to disable this the first chance they get, and the way to do that is just to change these conditions so that they're never achieved. For example, minimum coolant temperature. CAGs minimum coolant temperature. Minimum engine coolant temperature required for CAGs routine. So, does your coolant temperature ever reach 200 degrees Celsius? No, mine doesn't. So I put it to 200 degrees Celsius and the CAG system will never turn on again. Simple as that. Transmission diagnostics, nothing in there. Fuel system. Most of these tabs you're not going to be able to do anything with. This is actually a separate module in the car called the FPCM. It's a computer that is dedicated to fuel management and pump control and injector control and stuff like that. There's only one tab in here that is extremely important, and that's the fuel control module tab right here. If you have a naturally aspirated vehicle, none of this is going to matter to you, but if you have any hopes of ever increasing the horsepower in your car by more than about 150 horse, so we're talking, into the range of 550 to 600 horsepower at the crank, you're going to need this. Now, this is only going to buy you a little bit of extra headroom. At some point, you're going to have to upgrade your pump and well, certainly your injectors. You'd have to do that anyway, but you would have to upgrade your pump at some point because the pump is only capable of flowing a certain amount of fuel, and past about 200 horsepower, it's no good anymore. So you have to get another pump, like a ZL1 pump or something. But usually after about 150 horsepower, your pump will be no good, but you can get an extra 50 horse if you pay an extra 2 credits and you get access to this tab. Normally this tab is not accessible unless you pay for the access to it, to the FPCM. You'll have to download another file. Well, it's the same file, but it's another piece of the file that they give you access to. Anyway, what you need to do is you need to go into this maximum desired pressure. What you'll notice is that you start off at 450, hang on a second, I think it's 450 kilopascals, I believe. It's about 4.5 bar. But anyway, this is the fuel pump pressure. And you'll notice that the fuel pump pressure actually goes down with increasing fuel flow rate, which makes no sense. Why would you want your fuel pressure to decrease when your demand for fuel is increasing? I can't answer that question. I don't know why GM did this, but it is a problem because basically what happens is you'll mash the gas, and if you have a supercharger, for example, you're going to boost pressure, you're going to need an extra 30, 40, 50% fuel that the naturally aspirated car was never designed to provide. So the pulse width, the pump is pulse width modulated. So basically the duty cycle on the square wave going into your pump determines how much flow the pump puts out. And at some point it just reaches its maximum and it just dies. But if the pressure is dropping, you're not getting the maximum flow from your pump. So what you want to do is you want to max out every cell in here to 450. And that will basically ensure that the same pressure is being commanded from the pump all the way through your power band. So when you get to those high RPMs, 5,500, 6,000 RPMs, and your car is starving for fuel, that's when you need it the most, and that's when you don't want your pressure to be dropping. So that's a table that you should definitely modify if you have close to the limit of horsepower that your stock pump will provide, which, as I said, is getting close to about 600 to just above 600 horsepower crank is where I would say that you would need a new pump. But yeah, this is a super important tab to purchase, and this is a super important table to modify if you are right on the hairy edge of that horsepower limit before you want to get an upgraded pump. Although most people will say that, most people will get angry and just say buy a new pump, because really that's the safe and smart thing to do when you're adding so much horsepower that your pump is getting sketchy on you. But if you want to cheat it, this is how you would do that. Everything else is not worth mentioning here. Going to system. System controls all the accessories in the car. In here you've got a table here, fuel system voltage minimum. By default, I think it's 12.5 or 11.5 or something like that. This basically says, what's the minimum voltage that your fuel system should have available to it in order to run. I maxed this out because the amount of available voltage will determine the amount of pressure that your fuel pump can provide. And as you saw in the previous tab, you want to get maximum pressure and maximum duty cycle to get maximum flow potential from your pump. So make sure you have as much voltage as possible and as much flow as possible and as much pressure as possible, and you'll get the maximum horsepower that pump can physically be capable of. In this tab, that's really the only thing that matters. Everything else is kind of not relevant. Let me see here. Going to fans. Fans is a pretty important section. It controls your thermostat is a physical thermostat. You can't control that electronically. It will open and close as it feels like it. It's set to a certain temperature to open and close, so coolant will pass through your radiator at a certain temperature that you cannot control. However, the fans you can control, and the fans will determine how quickly you get heat rejection from that radiator at a certain temperature. So what you want to do here is you want to make sure that you are running cool when you need to, and don't go with the common misconception that cooler is better and just go as cool as possible. I mean, you could go into this table here and you could just set your fans to be like 100% all the time, and try to you could try to get the temperature all the way down to 73 degrees by just filling this with 100%, so that the fan's running non-stop all the time. But you don't want that, actually, and I will explain why. Basically, the metallurgy and the tolerances that the engine is constructed with, it's all designed in such a way that you want to get maximum sealing out of your piston rings, to prevent blow-by and oil leakage, and basically maximize the longevity of the engine. But at the same time, you don't want excessive heat, because excessive heat will cause knock and detonation, and that's a bad thing. So there is an optimal temperature. It's about 90 degrees Celsius on most GM engines. In fact, it could be on most engines, period, but I think 90 degrees is, as far as I know, is like always the nominal temperature that you want your engine to be operating at. So, as you can see, my fans only start to turn on at around 91 degrees Celsius, and then they ramp up to about 91%. I'm a little bit on the fence about whether I should ever put the fan at 100%, because 100% duty is kind of stressful on anything. You're running at a full duty cycle, but 91 for all intents and purposes is just fine. And really, I could be more aggressive with this, and I could put it up to 100%, at 97. But basically, you want to keep the engine running at 91 degrees. Well, at 90 degrees, it's not listed in this table, but you want to keep the engine as close as possible to 91 degrees, unless you're at the track for one day and you know that you're not going to run like this all the time. Then by all means, go ahead and fill this whole thing with 100%, to try to get it down lower, because that'll give you extra performance in terms of air charge density and reduced probability of detonation, things like that. So that's this table here, and if you really want to, you can set this section up here, which basically controls how long your fan will run after you turn the car off. And what this can be good for is, if you're sitting around waiting in the staging lanes, to do your quarter mile, your car is basically still running, still producing heat, and could be overheating. And the last thing you want is to start your quarter mile race with a hot engine. So you can turn the key off, and in this case, I've got 300 seconds, which is about 5 minutes of run time, and the fans will run until they reach a target temperature that I've set here. So you can play with that and play with the fan strength as well. But basically, this table here is the main one that you want to concern yourself with, because it controls what your target temperature is going to be. And this tab here, the only purpose of this is to disable the air conditioning at a certain RPM and a certain throttle position. And the reason you would want to do that is because if you're you're pushing the car and you want to get, if you want to pass somebody on the highway, or if you want to, stab the throttle for whatever reason in the middle of your normal driving, and you happen to have the air conditioning on, it'll disable the air conditioning so that you don't have any parasitic horsepower losses from the air conditioning. You can get the maximum possible performance out of your car, even if you happen to have the AC on. Not really too important, but something that you might want to put in there anyway. And then under the speedo category, you've got the ability to basically remove your limiting on your speed, so that the computer will not prevent you from reaching the maximum speed that the engine can give you. That's set here and here as well. And then limit by fuel, you want to change these as well. This is not going to be a good idea for you to do unless you are going to a half-mile drag race. If you're going to a half-mile drag race, or you're going to set a land speed record or something like that, then you would need to disable the limiter on the car. But I've never been anywhere on a road, like a local road or whatever, where the speed is higher than, let's say, 80 miles an hour, which is about 130. And I've never been in a car that was limited at 130. Okay, I've been in one car that was limited to 130, but every other car I've ever been in can easily go past 130. So really the only importance of this tab is if you happen to be drag racing or doing some sort of a track event where you can reach higher speeds than the road speed limits, and then all you have to do is max out these values here and set them to something ridiculously high that you'll never reach, right? And that'll just allow your car to continue to accelerate until it reaches the limits of the transmission and the engine. And that's pretty much all you need to know about a basic NA tune. As I said, there's more content in here that would be relevant if you were upgrading your modifying your car to have power adders like boost, nitrous, cams, new heads, anything like that. You're going to need to retune all of this stuff. But for anybody just buying a car, going home, throwing a colder intake, or maybe just leaving it alone and you just want that extra free 20 horse, that's what you would do, and that's how you would tune it. So thanks everyone for watching, and as always, subscribe to my channel, like, and comment. Thanks a lot.